Hello, my name is Paul Jenkins, Managing Director of UK Packaging Innovation Consultancy, the Packer. Last week, we ran a really interesting webinar called Unpacking the Myth of Commercially Viable Plastic-Free Coating Technology. We had Stan and James, and they introduced us to their Morro Coating, which is a new type of coating which is completely plastic-free. It's a drop-in replacement to single-use plastics. So the Morro Coating is a breakthrough in barrier coating technology. We had a record number of questions in the webinar, so we thought we'd take the opportunity to do a separate recording to address them. So welcome, James and Stanley, to this secondary webinar that we're doing.
Hi, Paul. Happy to be
Thanks,
here
Paul.
and glad, I think, to set a few records in terms of questions asked in an hour webinar.
Excellent. Well, I think it's just a reflection of just the high interest in what you're doing. So without further ado, let's crack on with those questions. So the first question that we got during the webinar was, what definition of plastic are you using when you claim plastic free?
And I think this is a really crucial question, as we touched on in that talk. There is a lot of different language in this space, and being very clear is crucial. So for us, when we talk about plastic free, we're referring to EU SUPD regulations, and specifically Morro coatings fit within this new category of natural polymers. So those are non-chemically modified natural materials, in our case, non-chemically modified plant proteins, that put us outside of the broad definition of plastics.
Okay, brilliant. Next question. Is it possible to get samples to work with of the new coating? Can you ship to the US, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one. So yeah, we have product available in stock and can be shipped anywhere if people want to sample the products. We have a sampling service, part of 2M, that will take care of that. Just get in touch to the customer service email address, which will be shared at the end of this webinar, and we can take it from there.
Perfect answer. Does 2M produce the coating only or also apply the coating to base paper?
No, so to be very clear, our core focus is to supply the Morro dispersion coatings into the converter space. So to people typically who would have machinery and capability to apply the coating either through specific coating machinery or conventional print type processes. We don't manufacture any coated paper as sorts. We just make the coating that goes on it.
I saw you proposed a Morrow's grade for extrusion lamination.
So I think this might be a little confusion. I think we did touch on this in the webinar, but to be clear, the current Morro coating product is a dispersion product. So it's a replacement for traditional dispersion coatings. So it's not a lamination, it's not a thermoplastic based system.
Okay. And are you able to apply PFAS-free coating onto paper that the customer provides you with?
So I think this is a really good point about how we can sort of work together. As James said, 2M does not make coated paper, but if anyone in the audience or anyone listening to this has a particular paper substrate they want to get a few kilometers, 10 kilometers or so, coated to trial the material, we do know quite a few paper coaters in the UK and Europe, and we're very happy to facilitate a trial of that scale to get things moving quickly.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Pricing question here. What about its price per ton?
Yeah, so I think from a pricing perspective, we've been very careful to ensure we're in a competitive ballpark and we touched on some of this in the webinar in terms of how we're positioning this. Obviously, we're at a process where we've got limited capacity and working on a scale manufacturing project where we'll have much more capacity. So the price per ton really is going to be linked to our efficiencies as we get better at making this material at scale. And then also commercially, as we start engaging with end customers, trying to put in place pricing agreements that reflect volume commitment to the materials. So again, to be really discussed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Are you working on coatings for molded fiber food packaging?
So we've worked with a variety of partners to coat all sorts of different paper and fiber-based substrates, some of those in molded fiber. But to be clear, the coating is really the same product. We can moderate a few properties about it, but it's appropriate for really any fiber-based material, whether it's a three-dimensional molded fiber or flatboard or flexible paper.
Okay. Question about shelf life. What is the shelf life that these coatings can achieve for liquids?
So I think on that particular aspect, based on the work we've done, it's very, very dependent on the composition of the products that you're trying to protect with the packaging, and also the other substrates involved in the mix, to give a specific value. So typically we've done all of our engagements thus far on a case by case basis, and worked with our partners and customers to optimize the right solution for the right product. We've done a lot of work, for example, on the feasibility with films, with personal care products. And these materials, will behave differently with different combinations and different acidities and different levels of moisture. So it's very difficult to give a specific answer. And I encourage anybody who is interested in particular applications to come and talk to us and see where we can help.
Has the coating been tested on paper through a repulping process at a mill?
Yes, so actually we're working with a number of waste processing and paper mill groups at the minute to test the repulpability of the coating. I think, as we said in the webinar, we'll have some very exciting news about that coming out over the summer. But in essence, just like with the biodegradability question, we always aim to ensure that the Morro coating is never introducing any problems or any limits on end of life for the coated product.
Question about the single-use plastic ban and where sort of Morro sits in within this. So, the ban covers all types of single-use plastic, including biodegradable, compostable, and recycled plastic, and it includes items wholly or partly made from plastic, including coating or lining. Where does this coating sit within this?
Yeah, so I think as we talked through on the webinar, Paul, what we've tried to do is be very clear about where Morro materials sit in that landscape. There's a lot of coating technologies that are sitting in that ambiguous area of, for example, chemical modification for starches, celluloses, those types of technologies, PLA and other things. Lots of dispersion coating technologies, I think, sit in that middle ground. With Morro materials, we're very clear about where it sits, using the EU definition of a natural polymer and having no chemical modification at all to the product, really. So it's exempt from the core of those legislation pieces there that you mentioned.
So I think in a nutshell, I think that was a really good list from the question there of all the different ways plastics can come into products. But crucially, as James says, because we never cross this red line of chemical modification, Zampler and Morro coatings sit outside of the definition of plastic within this natural polymer category.
Okay, perfect. Are you planning to open the production sites in other countries?
Good question. Yeah, so I think as Stan mentioned earlier, our core focus at the moment is in Europe. We have obviously a plan to scale up manufacture in the UK, but through our 2M subsidies, we do have businesses in other sites across Europe, and we'll be willing to look into those types of things as we develop our business and get more traction in the market with Morro Materials and our partnership with Zampler.
Okay, awesome. Does the new coating have certifications of any kind that we could share with our customers in the lab?
So I think be very interested if this whoever asked this question could get in touch. Again, depends on the kind of certification you're interested in, but biodegradability wise, we have quite a lot of data from external testing to ISO and EN standards. Or if this is about food contact certification, we're very happy to share the results of the external testing we've had done for the European launch products.
Okay. A question around bagasse packs. A lot of bagasse packages we test show high levels of PFAS. Is this coating a viable solution for a bagasse coating for grease and moisture barriers?
So I think in terms of grease to moisture barrier performance, we'd be very confident in the coating as we've seen in a lot of the substrates. But I think this goes back to the point that bagasse is its own beast. It's coated in different ways. It has different requirements. So what we'd say is, again, we're very happy to arrange sampling or initial small supplies for the person asking this question to test that. And again, for all these different substrates, there's a whole world of fiber products out there. We really encourage people to get in touch and start handling the coating material as soon as possible to answer things like this.
Okay. How well does it process as a coating compared to the current standard materials, for example, PE?
And I think
Yes.
here this goes to the point, I think, James, you picked this one up in the webinar, which is about the fact that this really is intended to be a drop-in solution. It is an aqueous dispersion to handle, and it is designed to be a straight swap for traditional aqueous dispersion synthetic coatings. So if anyone listening is already using a synthetic dispersion, whatever the method of application, we see this as being a straight replacement for that you shouldn't need to replace any capital equipment to utilize.
Why does chemical modification make the coating not plastic free?
So really this is due to the new EU regulations and the SUPD definitions of plastic. And what this is trying to do is draw a very clear line between natural materials, natural polymer materials like proteins and others, which are safe for use and will degrade at end of life and can be relied upon, from bio-based materials, some of the things you, James, picked up on, these bioplastics, chemically modified starches, celluloses, where there is a need for a higher level of scrutiny about use.
Next question, are you open to visits and tours of the factory in Milton Keynes?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody who wants to come and look around would be very welcome. As I said, we will be over the next 6 months working on our modification of the site to put the investment in and to get the scale production up and running. We're working on a small scale operation at the moment, so can supply quantities that are needed, and we'll be having hopefully celebration at the end of the year when the project's complete to officially open the new centre. So watch this space. Very welcome to come, Paul, and see what we're doing.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that. Next question. A question around carbon footprints. Are you able to sort of comment on sort of carbon footprint of Morro compared to other solutions?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question and one we do get quite a lot. And part of this, I have to say, is as with any LCA, really you need to be answering this when the product is being produced at full scale and also when it's running through the whole supply chain. So the question of carbon footprint in use compared to other dispersions or laminates comes down to a variety of factors like the coating method and the way it's being applied, the coat weight, etc., which is something obviously we hope to have much better visibility of by this time next year when some of the first commercial product will be out on the market and we'll have that sight of the full supply chain.
I think as Stan said there as well, Paul, I think the LCA impacts in truth are going to be dependent on the end-to-end supply chain and also the combinations of the different materials. So as much as we talked about barrier performance with different thicknesses of coating and things, we're also talking here about LCA and the impacts, and it's down to the selection of all the things and how it's used end to end.
And crucially, of course, linking back to a previous question, we are very keen to find ways to produce the Morro coating around the world closer to the point of use, because as with any dispersion or solvent-based system, you don't want to be shipping a lot of water essentially around the world and adding to that footprint. And that's really something we're looking to avoid.
Good answer. Question around moisture vapor transmission rates. So what are the best typical MVTR values of the Morro coating on paper? What was the coating method used to generate the MVTR value?
So I think I just touched on it there actually, Paul. I think the performance of the barrier performance that we've referenced has been based on different methods of application and different coating thicknesses, and also the combination of the different materials that are used. So if you're trying to, for example, through a paperization project, replace a laminate with barrier performance for a particular type of food or other product, we can engineer the solution to suit the purpose, but it's got to be a combination of base materials and considered within combination of all the other things that are part of that bill of material for that finished package. So yeah, difficult to give a specific answer. We know that the functional performance of these coatings is very good from practical tests and can, to a degree, tailor the solution to work with the application. But it's got to be a combination of everything to really get to ultimate goal of maintaining packaging integrity and protection of product.
Are Morro coatings odorless? What is the pH of a Morro coating?
Yeah. So Morro coatings are slightly acidic as a liquid. But actually on that point about odor, James, I think we've done a lot of work with 2M as part of the scale up really to address concerns around that. Maybe you'd like to speak to it.
Yeah, of course. I think obviously food applications and having worked sort of in the industry myself, I'm well aware of some of the challenges around taint and odor and impact it can have on products. So we've done a lot of work with the development of the products to ensure that the relevant consumer and sensory testing has been done on the finished packages by independent parties, and that's been part of the evaluation process with a number of our lead partners as we've brought materials and new products to the market, and hopefully there'll be some news coming out in the next week or so. Watch this space on what some of those packages and products might look like.
What is the oxygen transmission rate, the OTR value of Morro coating on paper substrate? What was the coating method used to generate the OTR?
So I think this is a little like the answer to MVTR that James just gave. These kinds of barriers, as opposed to kit or cob testing for water and grease, are much, much more sensitive to that combination of substrate and coating. However, OTR is actually something we know a bit more about, just for historical reasons. And broadly, I think the easiest comparison for anyone listening is to think on a weight basis, the coating has a very similar OTR performance to something like polyvinyl alcohol. So if you're familiar with materials like that, I think you can consider the Morro coating to provide very similar OTRs on a weight basis.
I've got a question here that says, we have a couple of projects where we would like to remove plastic and replace with coated paper packaging as we require a moisture barrier. Who are Zampler working with in the carton industry whom I could approach, please?
So fantastic to hear. And obviously we are working with quite a few people in the carton, paper and board industry. I think we can't disclose them publicly. But again, if you'd like to get in touch either with Zampler directly or with 2M if what you're looking for is material sampling, we're very, very happy to facilitate that and to connect you to our partners already in the space.
Next one. First and foremost, fantastic efforts in the right direction towards reducing plastic usage. As a paperboard producer based in Sweden, we're exploring different barrier applications for our products. We're interested in barriers that are water resistant but not grease resistant to facilitate print adhesion. Additionally, have you ever investigated fire retardant barriers for cardboard? Could you provide insights or recommendations on such barriers?
Another really interesting question. And as I think we said on the call, at Zampler, we might flatter ourselves in saying we know quite a bit about protein. But when it comes to coatings, specifically specialty coatings, we really do look to be led by experts like the person asking this question. On flame retardancy, certainly the proteins themselves are not flammable materials. But I think, James, you might know a little bit more about flame retardant coatings in general to understand where this question's coming from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have other parts of our business in 2M that service the case PL sort of area. So anybody who's sort of making coatings, and we certainly supply some ingredients and components that go into to make flame retardant chemicals. But typically these are, heavily sort of PFAS loaded to give some of that flame retardancy and performance along with other materials. So yeah, absolutely. It's a good question and an area of interest that perhaps not yet really explored.
And I think that PFAS point, James, might explain why, Paul, this is actually the third time we've been asked about flame retardancy coatings in about the last month. So again, we'd be very interested for this person to reach out directly. To the other point about moisture but not grease resistance, I think specifically relating to the question around adhesive compatibility, I think one thing to note is I totally get where they're coming from on not wanting the grease resistant for certain adhesives. But generally we found adhesive compatibility is slightly different from what you might expect from traditional polymer coatings. So again, I'd really encourage whoever's asking this question to get in touch either with Zampler or straight to 2M and get a bit of material in hand and down on some board to see how it interacts with the adhesives they're looking at.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well, I think that obviously the work we have done, fundamentally these natural materials will give barrier performance for a number of things. So specifically for water, without the grease, that they do tend to come with decent oxygen barrier, decent grease protection, and water barrier. We can tweak and improve in certain areas with some different combinations of materials, but fundamentally there'll be an inherent grease resistance with these materials.
Okay. We've got a question about US FDA approval. What's the status of the Morro Coating in that regard?
So I think this is probably relating to food contact approval. And again, it's worth saying we are launching this product primarily in the European market right now. We are very excited about North America. And we've been through food contact approval here in Europe. Looking overseas to FDA approval for food contact, we'd be very keen to pursue that when we have a North American account that's got sufficient pull. But I think we're quite confident that should be fine based on the European results and also on the basis of safety that all of the components of the coating are GRAS materials.
At what point are you at with flexible materials for the chilled category that can be run through typical flow wrappers?
So I think, like we said, we are working with a few people on flexible materials to apply this coating for barrier and heat seal. I think for the chilled category, again, this might be something new with some slightly different needs that we'd be very, very happy to support in terms of facilitating some initial samples, getting some material coated for you to try on your line in your specific application.
Okay. What are the scuff resistant properties of Morro Coating?
So again, scuff is something I think because, as we mentioned, we focused a lot on food service and food packaging right now for internal coatings. My understanding is this has a big role in terms of cosmetics and luxury packaging. To our eyes, the coatings look quite nice. They're smooth, they're shiny. We haven't noted the scuff. But as ever, we're really, really keen if the person asking this or anyone else with a similar question wants to assess, we're very, very interested in supplying samples and hearing their response on topics like scuff resistance.
I think just to add to that, Paul, as well, the downstream conversion processing that these materials have been through obviously demonstrates that the scuff resistance is fit for purpose. And it's always a trade-off for anybody who's done sort of coating development work themselves between coefficient of friction, so having enough slip to get the coated product and material through the relevant conversion and finishing machines, but being robust enough and strong enough to still look good when it's on a shelf. So again, all the work we've done thus far has been very positive in terms of surviving those finishing and application processes. So some good reference points.
Yeah, brilliant. Very specific question here about stability. Is Morro Coating stable at 60 degrees Celsius?
So I'm going to presume this question is not about long-term warehouse storage. Generally, that warehouse storage, James, is tested for ambient temperatures up to about sort of 30, 40 is the elevated. But if this is a question about application, drying, heat seal, heat contact, yes, generally the coating is very stable with temperatures, even up to as high as those you find in heat sealed jaws, so sort of 180 to 220 degrees. We don't see the protein burning. We don't see a loss of functionality.
Okay. Have tests been conducted at an accredited institution for food shelf life food safety?
So for food contact safety, yes, we've done that, as I mentioned, with some third-party testing houses in Europe. If this is a question about shelf life for a complex packaged product, again, this is really something that varies depending on the application and the specific product that's being packaged inside.
An ultimate question. Have you done any trials or even commercialized for small paper sachets, i.e. used for sugars?
Yeah, so again, like we said, we're doing a little bit already in flexibles, and actually we're seeing a lot of pull on that flexible paper packaging. We're not specifically making any sachets for things like sugar. So if the person asking is interested in that as a cargo and as a market, please do get in touch. And again, for these kinds of projects, if the person asking has a product concept in mind, while we don't coat paper ourselves, we know quite a few people who do, and we're very, very happy to bring all the pieces together, bring the coating from 2M, use coaters that we have already worked with in the UK and Europe, and the paper and substrate from a client that matches their need to bring them something quite quickly that they can start to test on machines and test in product.
Thanks. Okay, the last question of a number of questions. So what if your coating is combined with a functional overprint varnish? Could it still achieve repulpability in standard mills?
I think, James, you know a little bit more about this world than me, so I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I think thanks, Dan. Obviously, we've talked before about obviously performance and how we can engineer performance. You know, we've talked about scuff resistance and things like that. OPV varnishes typically would improve things like that and gloss effect and things. We haven't done much work with additional overprint varnishes. Typically, the applications we've done thus far have really been about sort of direct food contact, food service type areas. But to answer the repulpability question, if an OPV varnish is a non-plastic free technology or another type of dispersion coating that Stan's alluded to, you know, then we can't really say yes or no either way with regards to the end of life. All we can confirm is that the Morro coatings themselves, in combination with substrates that have already gone through that repulpability certification or process, will be fine. But obviously, some of the OPVs and things that put in combination with Morro materials, we can't really say yes or no either way.
James and Stan, thank you very much for that real tour de force in terms of all the questions that we got. As I said, a record amount for any webinar we've done over the last few years. So we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and insights into your really interesting coating materials. So thank you very much, guys.
No, at all, Paul. Thank you for
Thanks,
organising
Paul.
it. And again, thanks everyone for the questions. I think it's great to see this level of interest in novel coatings technology.
Absolutely. And if anybody does want to get in touch or get samples, I think Paul's going to share our details at the end so we can follow up accordingly.
Great. Thank you, guys.